Good morning. This is Rich Sierra, President of the Florida Small Business Legal Center. Uh, Today we're talking about business SOS, 8 common legal mistakes business owners make and how to avoid them. It's a very special day today. Today is my anniversary. 11 years ago, I married my beautiful and sexy wife, Sharon. So we had a very, I want to thank her for 11 great years of my life, the best years of my life, and certainly looking forward to many, many more adventures with her. So very excited for today. It's a very special day. So in the spirit of that, I thought I'll talk about partnership disputes. So yes, we're going to talk about disputes between partners. So what better day to talk about partnership disputes than my anniversary? So when I told her this morning, she was laughing about it. So it's all good. So why do partnerships go wrong? And I'll talk a great deal about that in my book, Business SOS, in chapter 6. And in fact, the title of the book is Mistake Number 6, Entering into Partnerships with Friends and Relatives Without Partnership Agreement. A great deal of my practice goes into partnership disputes. I've seen a few hundred of them in the last 18 years of practice, and they have common themes. And one of the common themes that they have is that they do not have a partnership agreement. People go into partnerships with the best intentions. They want to go into business together. They have a great idea. Usually somebody has the know-how of the business, the business structure, the technical skills, and somebody has the money. And it could be something like a few years ago, I had a business that dealt with flipping homes. Two partners got together, and then the business was going to be somebody invested money in buying a property. Somebody was the general contractor who basically had the know-how on how to, go ahead and get the house remodeled and get it ready for sale, and then flip the house, make some money, split the profits. Seems like a very simple business model. It's not as simple as it seemed, and we have seen. If you watch AGTV, you see many of those shows. Flip My House. There are many of the shows that deal with flipping homes and the business of basically buying and selling homes. But that's one example of partnership. In this particular case, they did a couple of deals and they went well. And in my experience, when partnerships go wrong, is one of two things: either when the partnership is making a lot of money, or when the partnership is not making any money. And basically, there's a lot of tension along the way there. So in this particular case, what happened, they were doing well, and then one of the partners basically had access to the checking account and the company credit card, and then because they were doing well, then he decided to go ahead and put vacations on the company credit card and began to take personal expenses in the company credit card. And while the other partner was basically working and trying to get, the business up and running, and there were a lot of unaccounted for expenses. So when the partner approached the other partner and said, hey, what's going on here? He said, no, that's money that is owed to me by the company. That's, I'm entitled to do that. And that's where tension, and that's where basically the communication broke down. Eventually, my client went to my office and said, this is what happened. And then he brought a bunch of bank statements. There are a lot of trips, a lot of cruises that they were not really accounted for. The money should have been gone back to the company. And my first question that I asked was, do you have a partnership agreement? And the answer was no. And again, many partnerships, because they are started with friendships, they don't have one. And by not having a partnership agreement, then you have to kind of recreate what was agreed upon between them, basically by asking questions. You got to create that agreement, so to speak, by saying, what exactly do you agree to do? What exactly do you agree to do? how much money you put into the company, how much money did he put into the company. So you kind of basically begin to map out what was the agreement about. If not, you basically default to the statute. In Florida, an LLC, the statute is 605. And there are obligations between the partners in an LLC and any type of partnership. But by not having a partnership agreement basically creates more of an issue because you got to recreate it. So in this case, we had to do a demand for inspection of records that we're entitled to, and get all the documents, do an accounting, and there were some monies, and then they, of course, when that happens, then they accuse my partner of not doing enough work, basically also taking expenses out of the company, and then so basically both partners begin to accuse each other, and it creates more and more of a tension that makes the partnership, at some point the partnership has to be dissolved. Like many of these cases, they begin in court by filing a lawsuit. Then they go ahead and file a counterclaim, and then they go ahead and you go to mediation after some discovery, and eventually the case gets resolved through mediation. It's just basically the way it usually works. Very seldom you have a partnership agreement or a partnership dispute lawsuit that goes sort of with a trial, simply because of the costs and expenses. I mean, they don't. It means that at the end of the day, when you're dealing with business owners, they make the decision, they make the calculation. Is it really worth continuing this fight as opposed to trying to get it resolved, cut my losses, this partnership didn't work, and move on? So the matter got resolved, and there are many other examples. I can speak for hours about examples of partnerships not going well, but they'll have the common theme of not having a partnership agreement. So if there's any takeaway here today, is that if you're going to go into partnership, you must have it's not required for you to have one. So I rephrase that. It is highly recommended that you have a partnership agreement, simply because it makes your life a lot easier. Many times in my office, I get potential clients say, I want to go into partnership and want you to review this partnership agreement for me. At the very least, you're starting somewhere. I want to create a partnership agreement or operating agreement in the case of an LLC, or bylaws in the case of a corporation. So at least we're getting somewhere. So what I do, I ask, exactly what do you agree to do? We go through some questions, and sometimes they give me a boilerplate agreement that is downloaded from the web, and most of them, they're okay, but they're basically boilerplate agreements that don't go into the details that I believe are required to have a good agreement. And I'm going to go over some of the highlights, or some of the things that I believe an agreement should include. And in fact, what I usually do is, when clients retain me to prepare an operating agreement or a partnership agreement, I have a questionnaire that I give to them, and I said, do me a favor, answer these questions and send them back to me. And based on those questions, based on the answers to the questions, then I go ahead and prepare the draft of the agreement. And I say, if there are questions that you are not clear about, don't worry, we can talk about them and we can discuss them. And the objective of the questions is to begin to trigger a conversation. If you're going to go into a partnership with someone, you have to talk about sometimes some uncomfortable situations. Some difficult conversations need to be had. And, especially about money, about disputes. And you want to have those conversations out. It's easier to deal with them before they happen and have a mechanism as to how to resolve them, or how to handle them, as opposed to say, okay, things are going to go well, and don't worry about it. We're friends. Everything is cool. We're never going to have a problem. It's just, that's not real life. The reality is that we're dealing with human beings, we're dealing with people, we're different, and there's going to be conflict along the way. There's going to be disagreements along the way, and it's easier to have some type of mechanism in place that you can go ahead and resolve. Excuse me a second. So one of the things that I'll invite you to do is the following. If, since you're listening to me, and I really appreciate the privilege of your time and allowing me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts with you about business law, business litigation, and my book, Business SOS. If you send me an email, if you're interested in, send me an email to rich@richsierra.com. And I'll say it at the end of the show as well. Again, it's rich@richsierra.com. It's SIERRA. I'll send you, and just basically put in the subject, partnership questionnaire or operating agreement questionnaire. I'll send you the same questionnaire that I send my clients, and I'll send it to you free of charge. It's simply as a thank you for listening to me, and perhaps this might be helpful to you in developing perhaps an agreement or asking those questions. So one of the things that I basically, how to prepare for a partnership, and I go into the in my business SOS book. It's actually page 85. I talk about steps to prepare for a partnership, and I have a checklist and some suggestions that I'll give you, and I'm going to read some of them to you. Number one, I highly recommend to have an attorney prepare the agreement. That's very important. An attorney is qualified, and especially a business attorney is qualified to draft an agreement that includes the most important provisions that will protect the partnership or the LLC. One of the questions that you need to ask, that you need to discuss with your potential partners, how's the business going to be funded? It's going to be funded from, money that each of you will contribute. It's going to be funded from a loan. It's going to be funded from, 401k, family. So that's important because business requires capital to operate. So that's a good question to at least discuss. Listen, how much money do we need, and who's going to basically contribute those funds? Defining areas of responsibility, that's very, very important. And I will add not only responsibility, areas of authority. And that usually becomes a source of conflict in a partnership, that, the lines are not defined. And I know some partnerships that have worked very well, and actually I have some clients that have been partners for over 30 years. And they had an operating agreement. Number two, they have very clear, distinct areas of responsibility that basically they both respected each other, and those lines were clear. So by having that is very important. So if you're the technician in the business, then you have to basically say, your partner has to agree that to allow you to operate and run that business and make decisions in that business that require some technical skills. If you're the marketing person, then your other partner has to respect the fact that you're going to be marketing the company, you're going to be promoting the company. If you're going to be more of a passive investor, then you have to define, okay, I don't need to be involved in the day-to-day of the business, but perhaps I like to have some weekly reporting. Let's meet every 2 weeks to find out how the business is going. So have it defined, have it clear in the operating agreement. Another source of contention in partnership is access to the financial records. It is very common when someone comes to my office and says, you know what, I don't have access to the books. My partner is the only one that can write checks. My partner is the only one that can go ahead and has access to a checking account. My partner has a corporate Amex account. So that is very important to define. And if you're a partner in a business, you're entitled to have access to all the financial records, period. In Florida statute, you're entitled to have that information. So when a partner tells you, no, you're not entitled to have it, That's not true. You're entitled to have it. If you're a business partner, you should have access to all the financial records. The authority is who's going to be writing a check and the limits of authority. That's something that has to be defined. Obviously, if you need some notepad from Office Depot, you don't need two signatures. You need, something that is a day-to-day operation of the business as something that one partner should be able to make a decision on. Otherwise, the business will be paralyzed. But if you're going to make a major purchase in the business, then perhaps have limits of like anything that requires, for example, anything over $1,000. I'm using that as an example. Should require at least consultation with the other partner. And depending on the business, every business is different. So just keep that in mind as you develop your partnership agreement. Again, another issue is clear authorization for payment. How is it that who's going to be paying for what and when and whether it's going to be online and how disbursements will be making. Decisions on hiring, who's going to hire and when, that's also another decision that has to be made. I do recommend having a third-party accounting firm handle the books. Sometimes I get situations where said, well, you know what? I said, do you have an accountant? No, we don't have an accountant. He has access to my QuickBooks, to the QuickBooks account. Do you have a password? No, I don't have a password. So by having a third-party accounting firm handle the books and records of the company, the accounting firm has an obligation to both partners, so both of you will have access to the same information. So I recommend that as well. If this is something that, depending on the formality, if it's something important that you discuss in the partnership, put it in writing, put a memo. I know people talk about minutes, and a lot of small businesses do not keep minutes. I mean, that's the reality. Let's just call it the way it is. A lot of them are family-owned businesses. But if it's something important that you want to memorialize, some decisions, then have at least some type of email or an understanding that, okay, this is what we discussed, this is what we agreed, and just put it in a file, in a electronic folder, and then at least you have some memorialization of what you discussed that day and that you agreed upon. How are you going to be compensated? There's another source of a dispute between partners. Usually I get a situation where one partner kind of runs the company and then, say, I'm doing all this work. My partner is basically lives in a different state. He just invested the money, but he really does not. I'm basically carrying the weight of the business and, she's not really doing that much. I need to get paid more. So I basically wrote myself a check for the amount that I believe I should be entitled to. So the partner gets upset and said, no, you should not have paid yourself that much money. We never talked about this. So discussing, okay, if I'm going to be running the business, this is what I need to make in order to continue running this business. Have that discussion. And the reason I send the questionnaire to my clients is for them to have the discussion. And if you're not agreeing on answering a question in a questionnaire, it is very unlikely that that partnership is going to work. So I send the questionnaire for two reasons. A, to trigger some conversation starters and have that conversation take place, even if it's difficult. But if you're not basically agreeing on a questionnaire, just having that discussion, it's never going to make it on paper. And if it doesn't make it on paper, very likely it's not going to make it in real life. So it's good to have that discussion beforehand. And again, I tell you that if you send me an email at rich@richsierra.com, I'm very happy to send you at no cost a copy of that questionnaire so you have it as a reference. I said thank you for listening to me today. I have a few more points before I wrap up. One of the things that is important to have, partnerships will have disagreements. And it might be minor disagreements that happens in any type of relationship or business relationship. And you might have disagreements that are major disagreements that require some professionals to step in, whether it's attorneys, whether it's mediators. So having what I call a procedure to resolve disputes is extremely important, because that has a mechanism in place that if there's, before a lawsuit is triggered, for example, in my agreements, what I recommend and what I suggest to my clients is that, before we file a lawsuit, let's have a mandatory mediation before a lawsuit is filed, so it gives the parties a time to cool off before there's a trigger on a court filing. So, you give notice of 15 days notice to go to a mediation conference. Mediation conference has to take place in 30 days. So it gives the parties an opportunity to go through that step first. And so I do recommend that. And if that does not work, there's other procedures where there is arbitration, and we can talk about that on another segment. But the objective is to have a step-by-step process on how this is going to get resolved. So what I recommend, and I mean, prior episodes I talk about this, I recommend mediation. I'm a very proponent of mediation because simply it is confidential, it is a informal process, and allows the parties to discuss a problem, and also try to resolve it with professional assistance in a very informal way, but also most of the time it gets resolved because it's about communicating with the third party. Another point that I want to make, and I'll expand on this one in another episode, is have an exit plan if one of the parties wants to leave the partnership. Say after 10 years, you decide, I want to go ahead and retire, for example. I want to sell you my part. I want to basically get out of the business. What is that going to look like? How's the interest in that partnership is going to be valued? And you can have that mechanism in place in the partnership agreement, and we can talk about that in another segment because that's a whole different section about succession planning, exit planning. That's a segment in and of itself, and I'll probably bring a guest to help me with that because that goes into the area of estate planning, which is outside of my practice area. So this is basically, if you have a takeaway here is, partnership agreements are important. Partnerships are important. Many of them work out. Many of them do not work out. The common themes basically, well, the ones that work, they do have partnership agreement. They have clear areas of responsibility. They have clear areas of communication, and they can be very, very successful and very profitable. The ones who do not work, they don't have the partnership agreement. They don't communicate, and they basically don't have in my opinion, a process of resolving disputes. So you want to go into a partnership, phenomenal. Just basically take a pause and ask those questions, have those conversations with your future partner, and it'll solve you a lot of headaches. It'll save you a lot of headaches along the way. So how you can reach me, this is via email at richsierra.com. If you're interested in learning more about my legal services, my website is floridasmallbusinesslegalcenter.com. We're at Facebook at FSB Legal. If you're interested in listening to the podcast, but also watching it as well, since we're in video, my YouTube channel is youtube.com/@RichardSierra. I'm in Twitter as Rich_Sierra. We're also on Instagram, brand new Instagram channel at FSB Legal. If you're interested in calling us as well, it's 866-842-5202. Remember, Business SOS, 8 common legal mistakes business owners make and how to avoid them. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or you can ask for it in your local bookstore. If you like the podcast, I ask you to please follow us so that way you can get this information when it drops every week. But also, perhaps, give us a review as well. That way, perhaps Apple Podcasts can suggest this podcast to other business owners that can benefit from information. Until next week, this is Rich Sierra with the Florida Small Business Legal Center. Remember that my goal is to help you succeed.